I see the benefits, it works, and this is how we do stuff. Now,
yes,
the nirvana, we are now a process-centric culture in our organization. Process is how we do stuff. This is how we think.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each of these episodes, I get the absolute privilege of sitting down with various BPM practitioners, people that are putting BPM into practice day in and day out in organizations. And I think the most valuable part of that is we're learning from those that are currently putting it into practice and I guess coming up to challenges, solving those challenges, working around those challenges, jumping over those hurdles that might arise. And I feel like that's a great way to learn is to, theory is good and great, but being able to sit down with someone that I guess can share what they've been going through and how they've overcome the challenges and also the wins. What are they achieving? What is BPM bringing to that organization? What value is it providing? And today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with John Murray. Now, John Murray, currently in London, I believe, London, UK, however, has worked extensively between New Zealand and the UK. So moving back and forwards there as a business architect, currently working for a large consulting firm and specialising in the Fintech and Supply Chain space. So quite a broad experience there. But John, thanks for sitting down with me today.
Yeah, great. It's a great honour. Daniel, I've been enjoying the series so far, and a lot of my big heroes have been interviewed, so it's been really great.
That's awesome. And on that, Roger Tregear was the one that recommended I get in touch. So, if Roger gives me a name, I'm like, I've got to sit down with that person because if it's a recommendation from Roger, then they must know what they're talking about. So, but that was obviously a very brief introduction of who you are and what you do. What we would be interested to understand is when was BPM, the idea of the concept of BPM first introduced to yourself, and then take us on a journey leading up to what you're doing today.
Sure. Well, I suppose the short answer is right from the start, really. So I went to university to become a mathematician or a physicist, and then just got a bit frustrated with the fact that I really wanted to see real world kind of applications. And so in postgraduate, I switched to operations research. And so that meant started getting into systems, into optimization, stochastic processes, queuing, simulation, that kind of thing, even net theory, which of course, now we see driving process mining, which is relatively new. And so from that point of view, and I was attracted to the idea that in that kind of work, you're not always driving towards a perfect solution, right? You're just, there's the idea of heuristic solutions or good enough solutions is there. And you have to accept that reality is really messy, right. Super messy. But the cool thing is when you create something, it's pretty much instantly useful. And that was, I found that to be great. I always fall back on that quote by George Box, the English guy who said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And so, everything you do, you have to recognize that there's no such thing as a perfect model. And
right.
But you can recognize that a model's useful or not useful. And so therefore, if it's not useful, get rid of it, move on to the next thing, So right. Fail fast concepts.
That's right.
So, from there, I got into systems analysis, algorithm design, left university, and then moved to the UK to work in fintech to begin with, around markets and trading, and ever since I've been doing that, sort of flipping between work within banking and markets and working with sort of pure supply chain organizations. So different sort of services versus products, very different, deterministic, well understood processes in supply chain, and really a lot of emerging processes in the face of disruption within financial technology. So it's been, it's a great ride. I'm still on it and still enjoying it, very, very much. Right now, I'm looking at strategy around data and analytics and capability model, and how to maximize investment in big data within banking, and how to apply that on the journeys that all the customers and internally and partners are taking, right? So that kind of thing.
Great.
I've been super lucky. I've been able to learn firsthand from a lot of really, really great guys. Right from the outset, Tony Vigneault and Tabasaka at Victoria University, who sort of were pioneers of operations research.
Right.
Then we've got, people like Alex Sharp, who you had recently on workflow. We've got Ron Ross and Gladys Lamb, business rules. Jan from Tiernan on decision modeling, which is something that I'm really interested in. John Zachman on enterprise architecture. Roger Bilton again on enterprise architecture, and as you mentioned, chiefly Roger, who's a great mate and really taught me a lot about the process, this holistic process of BPM. Understanding that it's not just about modeling; it's about culture, and it's a fantastically holistic view, and it really grounds you, I think. On the journey, so that you're not coming in imposing a view on people, that you're realizing that you're part of a journey that they're on. Yes, right. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
That's great. And I guess with so many areas in this space, as you were listing off all of those different, I guess, experts that have specialized in those different areas, for an organization that is looking to, adopt or implement, a BPM approach, where do you begin? Obviously, there are so many areas there, and you can obviously reach out to these specialists and these experts and get their advice. But I know that sometimes it can be quite overwhelming. Well, who should you reach out to first? Which area should you give focus to? And obviously there is value in all of it at different stages. I guess it depends on the organization and the process maturity level and a number of different things like that. But what would you say to that person that says, well, John, there's many areas there, where should we start?
Yeah, you won't know until you're in the room. That's just the fact of it, really. You're right. It's adoption, which is kind of the journey. Adoption is a journey, and you just got to kind of recognize that and understand what that journey is, firstly, and then decide on the approach. How you're going to go on that journey with a client or within your own organization. So I have a mental model, and it's a maturity model about increasing the value of BPM within an organization over time. And so the first step is and I'm happy, I'll send this to you if you like. First step is I've heard of it. So the first milestone is I've heard of BPM, which is sometimes that's where you start. You start with I've heard of it. Okay. And so the challenge then is to get from I've heard of it to I get it, right? I get what BPM is. Right. And so from once you hit that milestone, you got another step. So I get it. The next step is I can see the benefits of it. Right. Okay. So I get it. You've got to convince me. I can see the benefits of it. Once you get there, you've got to get them to, okay, I'm going to try it. I'll try it. You've convinced me, I'll give it a go, right? Yeah. And then once you get there, you can say, I'll tell you what, I'll use it, right? I'll use BPM. We'll see what happens. And the big one is then the next milestone is they say it works, right? Yes. It works. It works. Yeah. And then the final step is to go from it works to this is how we do things. This is how stuff's done. So that kind of adoption journey, you just have to gauge where you are, where a company is on that journey, and just concentrate on, well, in my mind, it's never as reduced to as simple a kind of approach as that. But in my mind, you're trying to just get their mindset moving forward into the next sort of milestone in that space. But once you get them to acknowledge that it works, the big thing is I can see the benefits, right? I can see the benefits, but then you have to prove it. And if they can say it works, then you're on your way, right? You're flying. But so how do you do it, right? How do you do it? How do you do this? Well, there's no perfect recipe for success. There's any number of ways, and like I say, you've got to fit the culture, and you won't find until you're in the room. If you want to kickstart it, there are a lot of methods. I like Kotter's kind of 8-step method, where your first step is create that burning platform. Yeah, it tends to galvanize people if you're in a hurry and things. And I think, and generally the journey, Roger Tregear's 7 enablers, that kind of holistic model of BPM is about as good as I've ever seen. Not that I'm an expert, but the point is that I've applied it, I've used it in more than one, or used relevant, pertinent aspects of it in lots of different engagements, and it's come up, it's worked, and it's very practical. So those and everybody will use a different approach. Some people will go into it with the brief to optimize, so to remove waste or defects, right? In which case they're being asked to do a Lean Six Sigma workup, so a different approach, right? A different methodology.
Yeah, that's great.
So those are the steps that you might take, but adoption is the biggest challenge, definitely.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you can go on, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, you're talking about bringing them on the journey and taking them through those steps. When you're talking about are you talking about process performers, the participants, the senior level executives, everybody, or who should we be bringing along that journey?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So where do you start? Well, adoption is if you can get the CEO to take it on, which is, so when I worked in New Zealand, I was working for Zespri. So Zespri are the world's largest exporter of kiwi fruit. And they're a very lean, very efficient organization that run that whole supply chain network from their head office, right on the beach in New Zealand. But the point is, the key thing was that the CEO, he got it.
Right.
He got it, right? And so we can say, okay, then once he got it, then that engagement then will disaggregate through the organization, right? And will go down. So if he turns up for a meeting, all the GMs, the general managers will turn up for a meeting, and you've got, even if you haven't convinced them, they will collaborate with you even if they haven't bought in, because it's come from high. But when you get down, you're going to face challenges, people who don't understand what a process is. As soon as you start talking about measurement, and people become nervous. If you talk about ownership, people become nervous. So you have to prepare those conversations for people to understand that ownership is not a stick to beat you with. It's a way to if you like, predict the direction of process over time, and so give you the sense of an early warning that you may need to improve your processes, but it's certainly not the idea of some sort of KPI approach.
Yes,
some places might do it. So that culture change is an obstacle. You have to convince people who control budgets,
right,
that they're going to potentially lose control, because if you're going to then move to, if you like, investing cross-functionally in the organisation, then they lose a level of control, and so that sort of, and a lot of big organisations, and I know it, everyone knows it, they're very siloed, and the investment strategy is also very siloed, and so for someone to come in and then stop from thinking about their world vertically, and often investment drives the politics, drives so they're effectively in competition. That competition is an obstacle to doing BPM, and so trying to have conversations where you break that down, and those conversations ultimately have to be senior level conversations. And at the individual level, you're taking people from being fairly agnostic, or fairly indifferent to process. you're trying to get them to, you're trying to evangelize so that they become kind of more zealots, and you're trying to convert them. You're kind of evangelizing in order to convert people one at a time. Sometimes it's one at a time. Yes. And if you understand your stakeholders, you understand the ones you need to target your evangelism against. But you have to recognize that if you're not going to, if your elevator pitch is not the right elevator pitch, you change it.
Yes,
it's flogging a dead horse. It really is. Otherwise, and often if you're stepping into a new organization, you only have that one opportunity to make that first impression, not just for yourself, but also for BPM as a paradigm, if you like.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess it's an interesting point on the elevator pitch, because obviously anyone that has, had an elevator pitch or had to present that elevator pitch, that short 60-second, what's value am I going to bring? I guess language would be a big part of that, to understand. I know that you've worked at all different levels within the organization, down in the grassroots of, say, more so the technical side of things, all the way up to the strategic sort of vision and direction side of things. And I can understand that depending on who's in front of you, depending on who you're giving that elevator pitch to, you'd have to change up your language.
Yeah, you do. So in terms of the process, you try and persuade people about, the value of processes. Really, you need them to understand the concept of value, because that's what your process is all about, really. And so, all the outcomes of your processes have to be sort of generating or accumulating value in the organization. And so, the first mental full stop that you need to have, or exclamation mark you have to, is that processes generate value. And Roger's first class at explaining, telling that story.
Yes.
Once you accept that it is the processes that generate the value, then you say, well, let's have a look at the sort of golden triangle view of organizations, which even at the top level, people have been exposed to the idea of people, process, technology, although we tend to add data to that now. That golden triangle is that you look at that and you ask yourself, okay, where is the value being generated? And if you've persuaded people that it's process, then that's where the value is being generated, and it's being operationalized or realized by both your resources, your technology and your people. And so then you would say to them, well, so how many people in your HR department? And they say, we've got 400 people in our HR department. How many have you got in your IT department? Well, probably 1,500 people in our IT department spread across the world. And said, so you're managing your people and you're managing your technology with vast resources. Why wouldn't you manage your processes with the same, care and attention? Right. And you do get a kind of a thing going through their head, because if they accept that, if they accept this idea that the processes are the thing, so you put people sit people down in front of a computer. If you don't give them a process, what are they going to do, right? I mean, it's simplification, but those are the kind of mental pictures you want to try and cement. And people, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But that idea of process has value, why it generates the value. So why wouldn't you invest resources in managing processes? Yes. That's kind of the backbone of the argument, right?
That's right. And something you mentioned.
And the other thing is, if you, for example, decide you want to optimize your processes, then you're going to get benefits in terms of your resources, right?
Yes.
So you're potentially going to, your organizational design will be tuned to your optimized processes, and your technology will be rationalized across the services that you need to deliver these wonderful new optimized processes. And so, why wouldn't you do it, right?
Yeah. No, that's good. And I guess on the topic of optimizing your processes, something you mentioned right at the start when talking about there not being the perfect model, and it's about working out what's good enough. When it comes to optimizing and improving business processes, is that a question or that comes up where, like, obviously when improving a process, how do you know when you've, I guess, milked that process for everything it's worth? I guess then it sort of maybe moves into the conversation of, incrementally improving a process versus radically transforming that whole way you deliver value. But yeah, when does someone know that process is good enough, or you've done as much as you can to get as much value out of it?
No, it's a good question. So people will always want to improve, right? They will always, and so especially if you're setting a measurement, and if you're taking an approach, like a Google or somebody where you're setting stretch targets, always setting stretch targets, then you're trying to hit those. Then there's always a driver to improve processes. But quite often it could be about scale, right? And so it's not just the workflow within your process, but it's the level of quality in that, the level of scalability. So can you scale up a process now that so if you're under a mergers and acquisitions kind of model, we're about to double the size of our organization. Will our processes scale?
Right.
When we've dealt with all the integration. And similar questions around quality. We see in processes now that one mantra that I work to is that I will always try to be separating workflow from decisions.
Right.
So you absolutely simplify workflow. The workflow is very, very stable over time, but the decisions are made by people, and progressively they become, they're being made by machines. And so the quality of those decisions is where you may be focusing your process improvement, but it's not a process improvement around workflow necessarily.
Right.
It's a process improvement about the quality of the decisions in the process. And that comes from the fact that, process management, process improvement has traditionally been a cost play. It's been trying to reduce costs.
Yes, right.
Everyone accepts that, or eliminate issues in it. But progressively, and especially in banks, for example, operational risk management is a fantastically huge driver. If you're a bank, the prospect of losing your banking license far outweighs, reducing the time for onboarding by 10%.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So you're concentrating on operational risk management, and therefore your decisions have to be extremely good.
Yes.
They have to have really good provenance. You have to be able to demonstrate the validity of them, and ultimately, when you capture them, you're in a position then to use them as an asset, a decision as an asset.
Right.
Within the organization, right? You can reuse it if it's still valid. And so, there is, the definition of success is always a very, very a nebulous thing, and it's sort of, chasing off into the distance. Strategies change. Business models are reasonably stable, but a business model could change. But strategies are reasonably, stable. But if a company changes its strategy, then you would argue then that the knock-on effect of that is that the processes will need to change to deliver or operationalize that strategy, right?
Right.
Yeah. So changes, always there.
Yes. Yeah. That's good. And how important is that link between the strategy and the processes that deliver the value? Obviously, as you were saying, if the strategy changes, the underlying processes need to change as well. But I know that there are many organizations out there where there isn't that clear link or distinctive link between the strategy and the big picture versus the day-to-day, what's happening in the tasks that the people of the organization are carrying out.
No, it's true. That line of sight, sometimes it's assumed, right? So the people at the top assume that the people making strategic decisions are assuming that their decisions are being translated into, goals and objectives and ultimately books of work further down the organization. And there's a level of trust involved in that communication, and there may be assumptions about it happening. Where it comes off the rails is when you start measuring, right? So if your strategy if your strategy is saying, we need to, well, whatever the targets, we need to do something, and then you spend, 10 million, on some change initiative, which involves process, and you don't see a return on that, then you're asking yourself, okay, is that alignment there, or is it not? Is it functional? So, in starting out on a process kind of improvement or a BPM organizational cultural change with BPM, you really need to establish those links. And there are plenty of architectures out there. There's plenty of meta models that will do it. There's motivation models. There's TOGAF. There's any number of models where you can align the strategy. You just have the will to do it. And often, and that's what I'm talking about, investing in the resources to manage processes within an organization. And that's not just somebody coming in, doing 500 process diagrams and a couple of PowerPoints telling people how they should conduct themselves and then disappearing out the door. Yes. It's about instilling that level of communication at all levels of the architecture. I mean, it does. I mean, it interests me very much, which is why you are constantly adapting your view of what processes are. You're just switching between a capability view focused on investment or a process view, based on either solving problems or exploiting opportunities. So it's it's an art, but that line of sight is really important. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And the more that you can bring that line of sight between the work that you're doing and the goals, the strategy, the drivers, if you can expose that on every single document, if you're at the top, you're saying, I'm doing something, there's the line of sight, then, very simple thing, like a breadcrumb, right?
Yes.
If you can have strategic breadcrumbs everywhere in your documentation, then it answers that question, forces people to think about it.
Yes, that's great. And when you were talking before about having the steps that you need to walk people through to adopt or buy into BPM, one of those topics or one of those steps or stages were making sure that they understand the value of business process management. How much of that pitch comes down to presenting, I guess, real world case studies? How much of an appetite is there for them to understand, well, how has this worked in a real life application for another organization versus theory of, this is what we hypothesize to happen? Is that something that is valuable for that top level management? It's a really powerful tool to do it. So that sort of anecdotal thing, actually, Alec makes some fantastic, I was talking about the other day on his podcast. Really is. Storytelling's a very powerful kind of thing. So I'll pull up some stories, and it's hard to anonymize them in the banking industry because everybody knows what everybody's kind of doing, more or less. But sometimes you can bring stories across from. So if I recently brought a story across from publishing into banking, for example, right, and saying, this is how you. The details are not important, but the similarly in supply chain where the end-to-end processes like order to cash, purchase to pay, they're really well-trodden grounds. They really are, and they're really well understood. But within publishing, for example, the idea to value chain or the concept to market chain is extremely important to them, because if you're publishing a book, right, you're going to be spending a lot of money over a long period of time, especially if it's an academic book. You spend a lot of money over a long period of time. You need to be, fairly sure along the way that you're putting stage gates in to say that you're going to get some return off that. Right. In banking, again, like I say, product development is a big deal, and feature development is a big deal, and now especially sort of application development and trying to fight off disruption. These are all really, really big
big drivers.
Mm.
But essentially the drivers is still, the undercurrent is all around managing operational risk, I think.
Yeah, no, that's good. And obviously over the last 2 years or 18 months, we've seen, a lot of disruption in a lot of industries around this, the global COVID pandemic that has really, I guess, done a lot of damage to supply chains and really disrupted things. I mean, for some organizations, it's forced them to pivot, and or for a lot of organizations, it's forced them to pivot. And for some of them, they've, untapped new markets or new opportunities that they hadn't even considered before. How has BPM played a role over the last 18 months? Do you think there's been an increasing appetite for it? Do you think it's been high on the priority list, or do you think it's something that that hasn't been, valued as much or looked at into as much?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the drivers are. There's always, you don't use the word, it's not hype, but there's always, trends within BPM, which create a lot of noise, or they're underlying trends. So things around RPA and process mining, for example, people take them because they're so plausible. They're very, very plausible. They sell themselves very intuitively, right? Mm-hmm. And so, people will take them on a little bit on spec for those things without necessarily having use cases really, really firmly, caught in their mind. Right. And they will take little steps to pilot it with some scenario. COVID, I'm not so sure. I mean, I certainly see it. I certainly see that. The move to so much activities taking place online opens up. It exposes a lot of risk, right? Mm. So if you were looking again at banking, you would say it exposes the risk of financial crime and fraud hugely, because there are now new channels, new players, new opportunities for people to behave badly or act with malice, right? Right. And so the banks then have to improve both their processes and their decision making, along with that, to try and defend themselves or to stay ahead of that. And so some emerging things, and you want to be getting to the point at which that your process will be very adaptable. Yes. So the idea is, one popular idea out there is around, at any point in time in a customer's journey, or from a bank or an organization's point of view, what's the next best step we should be taking? Right. So we're on a journey, we're in a process, we're at a particular point. Where should we go from here? What's our next best action? Right. So it's less deterministic, it's more case-based from that point of view. And so that's, it drives a lot of thinking in that area. But COVID, I'm not sure. I don't have any experience of that, and I'm sure other people, certainly have. Mm-hmm. Trying to put everything online, rather than necessarily face to face. I mean, you and I will find difficulties doing our work. For example. Yes. On Zoom without being able to read the room. It's just a fact of life. Yes. Yeah. Right. And what is the difference between, or the gap between, the processes that have been, I guess the to-be processes, or what the organization expects the process participants or performers to execute? I guess that's from an internal perspective, but then I guess also from the customer's perspective, there is an intended journey that you would take the customer on. I guess the most optimized or enjoyable journey and process to make that experience. We know many organizations that have acquired mass customers from competitors because they've presented a more enjoyable experience for the customer. But what's the gap between
what should be happening and what actually is happening. How do you measure that? I know that a topic that is interesting to you at the moment is that you mentioned is process mining, and you also mentioned earlier in the conversation about being able to measure process. What is that gap between what is communicated to the process participants and then what actually happens in the process, and how do you close that gap? Understanding what's actually going on, and how do we make sure that we can ensure that our process participants are executing on that as closely to what the ideal is as possible, as well as the customers.
Yeah. So certainly, I mean, as is process modeling goes, process mining is certainly coming to the party and being a fantastic tool at establishing the current state around reality. I mean, of course, because it's data-driven, it's a double-edged sword, right? So it depends very much on the completeness and accuracy of the data that's being fed into it. I'm, also in terms of that process, from that process discovery side of things, I'm not sure that I'm going to completely be comfortable if I walked into an organisation and instead of them saying, John, here's, meet the head of customer services, you're going to meet the team later in the day to talk to them. And I go, great. Or they can say to me, John, meet the event store. Well, yeah, I mean, great. Great. But I mean, there's in my stomach tells me that there's something missing from that picture, right?
Right.
And so it's neither one nor the other. And in reality, it isn't one or the other. I'm just making a point. But certainly that sort of forensic side of things. If you're talking about conformance, then process mining is a pretty good tool, actually. I would say it offers evidence-based conformance checking. Rather than anecdotal or. But again, it stands and falls on the quality of the data that's being used. So it's so there's trust in that, as there is trust in any other type of sort of conformance checking.
Yes.
And certainly if you're being, if somebody comes in to audit your processes, it's not very difficult to pull the wool over their eyes if you just hand them 500 or 1,000 process diagrams and say, here they are, we've done it.
Right.
Yeah. So there is a sophistication potentially around conformance checking that's coming in. How does it expose gaps? It will. So from a forensic point of view, or diagnostic point of view, being understand the reality of your workflows on a case basis. Well, it's the obvious things are unlocking deviations that are non-conformant, but also finding where your performance issues are.
Yes.
In the workflow. So I mean they have a numbers-based value, right? They have a value to do that. In terms of providing insight, well, I would say the scientific methods is an art. It's not a science.
Yes.
And the tools that you use for that is language. It's not data. And so,
right.
You need to framing your hypothesis is a challenge for language. It's a semantic challenge. It's not a data. And so if we paid as much attention to semantic quality, so if we had semantic quality management as a capability, if we paid as much attention to that as we do to data quality management, then I think less projects in general would fail,
right? Because
you'd be establishing that convergent sort of common understanding right at the outset.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And obviously, with these technologies, a lot of organizations can jump onto them because, maybe they've seen a competitor doing it, or there's a lot of hype around it. I think you mentioned earlier about, organizations jumping into things like this without actually understanding what use cases are applicable to our organization? How are we going to adopt it? How are we going to use it? Do we have an underlying driver? What's the why? What's the purpose? How does this link to our overall strategy, our corporate objectives, things like that? But when you look over the next 2, 3, 5 years, looking into the future, where would you be encouraging organizations to be investing their time, effort, and energy when it comes to BPM? And obviously, every organization is going to be at a different maturity level and maybe require something slightly different. But I guess as an overall trend, where do you see, what does the next 2, 3, 5 years look like for BPM?
Yeah, it's a really good question. How long have we got? So I suppose the themes about the future in organizations, disruption's a big theme, right? And for large organizations. And so the response to disruption is be able to adapt very quickly, and which is the reason you have a business architecture. It's the ability to adapt. I won't say agility, I would say adaptability. So the ability to adapt. And so being able to describe and manage your processes in a way that they can be adapted quickly, I think is a huge driver. I think I really think in the face of the sort of risk management idea, which again is driven a little bit by disruption and the speed at which stuff, and it's also to some extent driven by automation,
right?
Increasing the risk of something happening while you're asleep, means that focusing on managing the control points within processes, so managing the decisions as closely as managing the workflow within a process. Right. I think that's going to be really, really important. And what that converts to in terms of the capability of a process architect or a professional, BPM professional, is that they need to understand DMN, for example. They need to know how to draw a decision requirements group. They absolutely do. They need how to construct a proper executable decision table. Things like that. But they need to have the art of being able to determine within a process where there are decision points and abstract them away. And basically you're just having one point, one task, and that task is to determine something. Right. Yeah. And then you're abstracting the job of determining that is not a process job, or often not a process job. But it's a decision modeling task. There's that. There's still the things that machines can't do. Machines will struggle to create a really good problem statement, I think, in the future. So I think there's still a place. There's still a place for us.
Yes, right.
But I'll go back to Michael Roseman, actually, his recent comments on you, saying that, we really understand the process of fixing processes pretty well. We have lots of approaches, lots of methods. We can, there's a massive book of knowledge, although, as a practitioner, you will never use a book of knowledge. You'll use it's not a BOK, it's a BOT, your bag of tricks, right? You're just using a bag of tricks.
Yes, right.
that you built up over time. And so, your bag of tricks can address performance problems within processes pretty effectively.
Right.
Where the challenge is just to be able to do what Michael referred to as determine what's possible within your processes. And the what's possible thing also goes back to this sort of disruption driver as well. So you need to recognize opportunities and have a way of exploiting those opportunities.
Yes.
And going all the way back to the idea that your processes generate your value, then to generate value from an opportunity is, not fundamentally, but partly to do with how you construct the process to do it. Right. Yes. Right.
Yeah.
So but look, every new idea comes through. Everything in your idea's got to go through that sort of adoption cycle.
Yes.
So there's you need to get it so that people can see the benefits.
Yeah.
And then you need to get them say that it works. I see the benefits. It works. And this is how we do stuff. Now,
Yes.
the nirvana, we are now a process-centric culture in our organization. Process is how we do stuff. This is how we think, and ultimately it's going to drive how we organize, investment. It may even result in the organizational design changing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. And for those that are listening, and they're hearing you talk about how BPM can be adopted, the value it can bring to an organization, talking about the stages and the journey of getting buy-in and bringing people on board to that journey. For those that want to learn more about this idea of BPM and what should our organization be doing? What are the next steps we should be taking? They want to learn more about this topic in general. Maybe they've just recently been given the job title process design lead and have been tasked with the role to improve an area of the organization's processes. Where would you encourage that person to go to, continue their learning of BPM?
Well, I'd start with these podcasts, actually, Daniel. I'd be very surprised if there's anybody missing from the galaxy of stars that you've assembled on Process Pioneers. But they, start with the pioneers. Start by listening to Paul Harmon. Start by listening to, I don't know if John Zachman, you've done him, but these people who are real pioneers. Paul Harmon and Roger Belton and Roger Tregear, and then just working through some of the the big thought leaders within the start with the thought leaders so that you have a good grounding in the motivation, right?
Right.
For doing process work, because unless you're clear why you're doing it, then you're never going to quite get it.
Yes.
But then you've got all these people who are doing it, right, and doing it, and you're getting their war stories, and that's massively valuable. So it's not work your way through these things. Certainly they should contact you if they have a particular. I'm advertising for you, but they should contact you if they've got a particular question in mind. You could direct them to potentially direct to the journey they need to take with the information that they're getting.
Yes, yep.
The other thing, there is a community, springing up around Process Pioneers as well, and that's a pretty good community. The BR, I can't remember. I think it's the businessroyalcommunity.com is a really good process, site. So get to these things. Apart from that, you just have to do stuff, and I will always say, the two big ones is, all models are wrong, some are useful. You just have to accept that. You have to accept that if it's, and what comes on behind that is that, especially when you're starting out, you need to think big, and you need to start small, and you need to fail fast. And the failing fast is recognizing something's useful or not useful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's nobody's going to wave a magic wand and pour all the knowledge and experience into your head. You learn that along the way. But certainly understand what the value of BPM is. BPM is the first thing.
Yes.
Because you will be constantly asked to explain what that is.
Very true.
I'll be asked. So the question you're going to get around, the biggest question with adoption is, what's in it for me? And it'll happen at every single level of the organization. Every single level. They'll say, what's in it for me? They'll be thinking it, or they'll say it. At the top of the organization, it'll be, show me the money, because that's what's in it for me. At the bottom of the information is, will this make my day better, shorter, longer, easier? Will my job be protected? Whatever. So, prepare yourself to answer that question, I guess.
Yes, that's great. That's fantastic. Well, John, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me and having this conversation today. I've been furiously scribbling down notes, and I'm sure that the people that will be watching this will be as well. I've certainly gleaned a lot from our conversation. So I just want to thank you for sitting down with me and sharing your knowledge and experiences with us today.
Huge pleasure, Daniel. Keep up the good work.